There are moments in life when the world as you know it stops breathing. When everything you trusted, everything you built your days upon, suddenly dissolves into uncertainty. You stand in the middle of your own story and realize someone has been living a parallel life inside it. The person you shared your most intimate moments with, the one you believed you knew, has been living in a secret narrative you were never invited into. The collapse of certainty is the moment when the ground beneath you disappears. It is the instant when the truth you never wanted to know makes itself known, and the story you thought you were living suddenly unravels. You look at the person you once trusted most, and they are both familiar and foreign. The home that once held laughter and belonging now feels like a stage where everything was being performed. Betrayal does not only destroy trust, it dismantles the very architecture of your reality. It takes away not just a person's faith in their partner, but their faith in their own perception of the world. When you discover that your husband has been cheating for years, the shock isn't confined to the act itself. It is the disorientation that follows. The questions that come like waves: what was real, what was false, and when did it all begin? You start replaying memories, conversations, and moments of tenderness, searching for clues you missed, wondering if you were blind or simply believed because believing was safer. The collapse of certainty leaves you standing in a place where logic and emotion no longer align. What you knew no longer feels true, and what you feel no longer makes sense. Certainty gives us a sense of safety. It is the quiet assumption that tomorrow will look somewhat like today, that the people we love will remain who we believe them to be. When that is shattered, life becomes unpredictable in the most intimate way. You begin to question not only your partner's truth, but your own ability to trust yourself. How could I not have seen? Why didn't I sense it sooner? The betrayal becomes a mirror reflecting every doubt and insecurity you've ever had. It is not just an external break, it is an internal unraveling. Yet within that collapse lies something paradoxical, the possibility of clarity. When illusion falls away, so does the false comfort it carried. What remains is raw, unfiltered truth. Painful, yes, but real. The collapse of certainty forces you to see without the haze of assumption. It strips away the narrative you were told and invites you to write a new one. At first, that invitation feels cruel, but over time, it can become liberating. Because when everything you thought was unshakable has fallen, you realize that what truly anchors you was never in someone else's fidelity, it was always in your own capacity to face the truth, to endure it, and eventually, to rise from it. The many faces of betrayal reveal that infidelity is never a simple act of deceit. It is layered, complex, and deeply human. To understand it, we must move beyond the surface of the affair itself and into the emotional landscape that gave rise to it. Cheating is often reduced to sex, but its roots are rarely only physical. It can emerge from loneliness, unmet needs, disconnection, or even a silent grief that has been living inside the relationship for years. Sometimes, it is born out of longing not necessarily for another person, but for another version of oneself. The one who felt alive, desired, curious, unburdened by the weight of responsibility. Betrayal can carry many contradictions. The person who cheats may still love their partner deeply, even as they hurt them. They may be torn between guilt and desire, loyalty and freedom, truth and secrecy. These contradictions are uncomfortable because they challenge our moral clarity. We want betrayal to have a single meaning, a clear villain and a clear victim. But in reality, it exists in a tangle of emotions that defy simple categorization. It can be an act of cowardice, yes, but also a desperate grasp for something lost. A plea for vitality in a life that has become muted. For the betrayed, understanding these complexities does not erase the pain. It does not excuse what happened. But it can offer a kind of perspective, a recognition that infidelity does not happen in a vacuum. It happens in the silence between partners, in the unspoken disappointments, in the distance that grows when daily life replaces intimacy with function. Many relationships operate on unspoken contracts, agreements about what we do not talk about, what we pretend not to feel, what we silently endure. Betrayal, in a way, explodes those contracts. It forces everything that has been buried to the surface. The many faces of betrayal also extend to the betrayed partner. It's easy to feel like everything was a lie, but sometimes, the truth is more nuanced. There were moments that were real, even if others were not. There was love, even if there was also deceit. Holding both truths at once is excruciating, but it's part of the human experience. Love and betrayal can coexist, and acknowledging that paradox can be both devastating and freeing. Because when we see infidelity not just as a rupture but as a symptom of something deeper, a disconnection, a hunger, a silence, we begin to understand not just what was broken between two people, but what it means to be human in all our imperfection, longing, and contradiction. The awakening of self begins in the silence that follows the storm. After the discovery of betrayal, there comes a stillness, a pause between devastation and decision, where you begin to hear a quieter voice beneath the pain. It is the voice of the self that has been waiting to be seen. For so long, your identity may have been woven around the relationship, around being a partner, a wife, a constant. When betrayal strikes, that identity fractures, and though it feels like loss, it is also an opening. You are forced to ask questions that reach beyond the marriage. Who am I when love fails me? Who am I when trust is gone? Who am I when I stand alone? This awakening is not gentle. It begins with shock, confusion, and grief. It comes through nights of questioning and days of pretending to be fine when you are anything but. Yet slowly, as the dust settles, you begin to see yourself differently, not through his choices, not through his validation, but through your own endurance. Pain, in this way, becomes a mirror. It shows you the strength you never knew you had, the boundaries you had forgotten to draw, and the desires you had buried beneath the weight of commitment. What feels like breaking down is, in truth, a process of breaking open. In that opening, you might begin to rediscover what you once silenced. The passions you set aside, the dreams you postponed, the intuition you dismissed to keep the peace. Betrayal has a way of stripping away illusions, not only about your partner but about yourself. It shows you where you abandoned your own needs in the name of love, where you accepted less because it felt safer than asking for more. This realization can sting. It forces you to confront the parts of you that settled, tolerated, and hoped instead of acted. But it also empowers you to reclaim what was lost, your voice, your independence, your sense of worth. The awakening of self is not about rebuilding who you were before, it is about becoming someone new, someone grounded in truth rather than illusion. It is the recognition that while betrayal took something from you, it also revealed something to you. Beneath the pain lies potential. Beneath the fear lies freedom. This awakening is not about forgetting or forgiving too soon, it's about remembering who you are beneath the story of what happened to you. It's about meeting yourself again, not as someone broken by another's choices, but as someone reborn through the courage to face them. The dialogue between pain and growth is where transformation truly begins. Pain, by its nature, demands attention. It tears through the numbness of daily life and forces you to feel everything you have tried to avoid. In the aftermath of betrayal, that pain is raw, consuming, and often chaotic. It speaks in tears, in silence, in anger that erupts without warning. It is the body remembering what the mind wishes to forget. But alongside this pain, almost imperceptibly, there is another presence, a quieter one. It is the whisper of growth, urging you to look beyond what was lost and toward what can be learned. This dialogue is not linear. It is not a clean progression from hurt to healing. Instead, it is a back and forth, a constant negotiation between despair and resilience. One day, you may feel strong, ready to move forward. The next, you may be pulled under by grief again. Growth does not silence pain, it coexists with it. It asks you to sit with your discomfort long enough to understand what it is trying to teach you. Every wave of emotion, no matter how unbearable, carries a message about your needs, your limits, and your capacity to feel. Pain becomes a kind of compass, pointing you back to yourself. When betrayal enters a relationship, it shatters illusions not just about the other person, but about the idea of control. You realize how fragile stability can be, how easily the familiar can vanish. This realization is terrifying, but it also opens the possibility for a deeper kind of strength, the strength that comes from knowing you can survive uncertainty. Growth is born in that realization. It begins when you stop trying to return to the life that existed before the betrayal and instead start to build a new life with clearer eyes and a stronger heart. Pain, when faced with awareness, becomes transformative. It strips you of pretense, of the need to perform or please, and brings you into direct contact with truth. Growth happens when you begin to respond to that truth, not with bitterness, but with intention. You start to see that your heartbreak, while devastating, has also made you more awake to yourself. You begin to understand what you need, what you will no longer tolerate, and what kind of love feels authentic to you. The dialogue between pain and growth, then, is not a battle but a conversation, one where suffering becomes a teacher, and every tear becomes a thread in the fabric of your becoming. The power of choice emerges in the very moment when you feel most powerless. After discovering years of betrayal, it is easy to believe that all control has been taken from you, that your story has been rewritten without your consent. But what begins as devastation can evolve into a profound realization: you still hold the pen. The circumstances may not have been your choice, but what you do next is entirely yours. This is the quiet truth that often reveals itself in the aftermath of heartbreak, the understanding that healing is not about waiting for someone else to change, apologize, or make amends. It is about reclaiming the authorship of your own life. Choice is not always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like simply getting out of bed when you would rather hide from the world. It looks like deciding to confront the truth instead of running from it, or choosing to feel the pain rather than numb it. These are small acts of courage that, over time, build the foundation for strength. The power of choice lies not in grand gestures but in these daily decisions, the decision to keep moving, to keep breathing, to keep believing that your life is not over because someone else betrayed it. In betrayal, there is a temptation to let anger define you, to let the story become about revenge or self-destruction. But choice interrupts that narrative. It asks, who do you want to be now that you know the truth? Will you let the betrayal shrink you, or will you let it expand you into someone more self-aware, more grounded, more free? This is not about forgiving too soon or pretending to be unhurt. It is about acknowledging that even in your pain, you are not helpless. You can choose boundaries. You can choose healing. You can choose yourself. When you stand at the crossroads of what now, you are standing in the space between what was and what can be. That space is terrifying because it is unknown, but it is also sacred because it is full of possibility. The power of choice transforms victimhood into agency. It allows you to see that the end of one story is not the end of you. You may not have chosen the betrayal, but you can choose how you rise from it, how you speak your truth, how you define love moving forward. This is where freedom begins, not in changing what happened, but in deciding who you will become because of it. The reclaiming of power is not about dominance or revenge, it is about coming back to yourself after being pulled apart by someone else's choices. When you have been betrayed, you often feel stripped of agency, as though your sense of control, safety, and worth have all been taken from you. For a while, you may live in reaction, reacting to his lies, to the pain, to the silence, to the endless questions. But eventually, a shift begins. You realize that while you cannot undo what happened, you can reclaim how you move forward. Power, in this sense, is not about controlling others, it is about owning your story, your boundaries, and your peace. Reclaiming power begins quietly. It starts when you stop waiting for answers that may never come and begin seeking clarity within yourself. It happens when you start trusting your instincts again, the same instincts that you might have doubted after discovering the truth. You start to see that your intuition was never the enemy, it was the guide that was drowned out by hope, by fear, by love. This recognition is a turning point. You begin to separate his betrayal from your identity. You begin to understand that what he did says everything about him and nothing about your worth. This process is not immediate. There will be days when the pain still feels stronger than your will, when the past pulls you back into the old narrative. But each time you choose yourself over the weight of his choices, you reclaim another piece of your power. You do it when you set a boundary instead of breaking one for the sake of peace. You do it when you speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. You do it when you stop apologizing for needing space, for wanting honesty, for expecting respect. Reclaiming power is an act of self-respect repeated daily, sometimes quietly, sometimes defiantly, until it becomes your new way of being. Eventually, this reclamation becomes freedom. You start to see that power was never something you needed to take back from him, it was something that had been within you all along, waiting for you to notice. Betrayal may have broken your trust in others, but in the process, it gives you a chance to rebuild trust in yourself. And that kind of power, the kind rooted in self-trust and inner truth, can never be taken again. The redefinition of love is one of the most profound outcomes of betrayal. When the person you trusted most has deceived you, it forces you to question everything you once believed about love, what it is, what it demands, what it should feel like. Love, once seen as safety, now feels dangerous. It becomes something that must be re-examined, not through the lens of fantasy or idealism, but through truth. You begin to see that love is not only about devotion or sacrifice, it is also about boundaries, respect, and the freedom to be yourself without fear of betrayal. The experience of infidelity, as devastating as it is, often dismantles old definitions that were never truly serving you. In the beginning, this redefinition feels like loss. You grieve not only the relationship but the version of love you believed in. The kind that promised forever, the kind that made you feel complete. You may even start to believe that love itself is a lie. But as time passes, something begins to shift. You start to see that love was never meant to be about losing yourself in another person. Real love does not require you to shrink, to silence your needs, or to tolerate dishonesty in the name of loyalty. Real love thrives in truth, even when truth is uncomfortable. Through the pain, you begin to understand that love and betrayal can coexist, not because love excuses betrayal, but because love, in its mature form, can hold complexity. You can acknowledge the moments that were genuine without denying the hurt that followed. This ability to hold both truths at once, to see love not as pure perfection but as a living, flawed, human experience, is part of the redefinition. It teaches you that love is not something you fall into blindly, it is something you choose consciously, with awareness and integrity. Redefining love also means turning it inward. You begin to offer yourself the care, patience, and compassion you once gave so freely to another. You learn that loving yourself is not selfish, it is necessary. It becomes the foundation for any love that comes after, because now you know that affection without honesty is not intimacy, and forgiveness without change is not growth. The redefinition of love allows you to approach relationships not from need or fear, but from clarity and self-worth. It's the realization that love is not what breaks you, it's what you learn to rebuild, within and beyond yourself, after everything has fallen apart. The art of letting go is perhaps the hardest lesson to learn after betrayal. It asks you to release what you once held closest, the memories, the expectations, the version of the relationship that existed in your mind. Letting go does not happen all at once, it happens in fragments. You begin by letting go of the need to know every detail, every reason, every why. You start to understand that closure is not something another person gives you, it is something you create within yourself. Letting go is not about denying the past or pretending it never mattered. It is about loosening the grip of what can no longer be changed so that you can make space for what might yet become. In the aftermath of betrayal, holding on feels like protection. You replay conversations, you search for meaning, you imagine different outcomes. You hold on to the hope that maybe, somehow, the story can be rewritten. But clinging to the past only keeps you bound to the pain that broke you. It turns your heart into a museum of what ifs and unfinished endings. The art of letting go, then, is the practice of accepting that the past cannot be undone, no matter how deeply you wish it could. It is the realization that healing begins not when you find answers, but when you stop needing them. Letting go is an act of self-compassion. It means choosing peace over control, understanding that your worth is not tied to what someone else failed to honor. It means forgiving not because they deserve it, but because you do. Forgiveness, in this sense, is not about absolving the betrayal, it is about freeing yourself from the constant replay of pain. When you let go, you begin to reclaim your energy from the endless cycle of remembering. You start to live in the present again, not as someone defined by what happened, but as someone shaped and strengthened by it. This process requires patience. There will be moments when grief resurfaces, when you feel the pull of nostalgia or anger, when you wonder if you have truly moved on. But every time you choose to release the story a little more, you make room for life to flow back in. Letting go is not about forgetting, it's about no longer allowing the past to hold authority over your future. It's about surrendering to what is, trusting that in that surrender, you will find not loss, but liberation. The journey toward wholeness begins when the chaos quiets, when the tears come less often, and when you begin to realize that healing is not about returning to who you were before the betrayal, it is about becoming someone new. After infidelity, it is natural to feel broken, fragmented, as though pieces of your identity have been scattered beyond reach. You may try to find yourself again in the same places you lost yourself, in explanations, in memories, in what ifs, but true wholeness is not found in the past. It grows in the present, in the daily decision to honor your pain without letting it define you. Wholeness is not perfection. It does not mean the absence of hurt or the erasure of scars. It is the gentle integration of everything you have lived through, the joy, the betrayal, the lessons, and the resilience that emerged from them. When you move toward wholeness, you stop seeing yourself as divided between before and after. You begin to understand that both versions of you, the one who trusted and the one who survived, belong to the same story. This acceptance transforms the wound from a source of shame into a source of wisdom. The journey toward wholeness also involves reconnecting with parts of yourself that you may have silenced. Betrayal can make you doubt your intuition, your beauty, your worth. It can make you question whether you will ever feel whole again. But slowly, as you begin to rebuild trust in yourself, you discover that the capacity for love, courage, and joy was never lost, it was only waiting for you to turn inward. You start nurturing yourself with the tenderness you once reserved for others. You begin to listen to your own needs, to protect your peace, to live from a place of authenticity rather than fear. This journey is not linear. There are days when you will feel strong and whole, and others when the past still echoes through your thoughts. But each time you choose compassion over self-blame, truth over denial, and presence over longing, you move closer to yourself. Wholeness is not something you arrive at, it is something you practice. It is the quiet realization that you are not broken, you are becoming. The betrayal that once threatened to destroy you becomes the very experience that teaches you how to return home to yourself, to your strength, to your heart, and to the unshakable truth that you were always enough.